Gameranx presents another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight up gameplay and some first impressions of the latest games releasing. This time around we're talking about Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Now the original Mirror's Edge was a bit of a cult hit. While it wasn't monstrously successful, it does have a lot of fans, and I could definitely tell by the amount of people asking us to do this video. And I was totally on board with the original Mirror's Edge. That was like something like 8 years ago, and it did have some really cool concepts and was tons of fun. And I'm really surprised and pretty happy that they made another game. The biggest thing here with the new Mirror's Edge Catalyst is the change to open world design, which has been up to much scrutiny and contention by fans of the original game. So how does this jump to the larger open world setting actually fare? Well, I'd say it's 50-50, basically like the rest of the game. I'll get back to that though. The story this time around, Faith Connors gets out of like a juvenile detention center to join back up with her group of runners with something to prove and a little bit of like mystery and revenge to it all. There's some flashback sequences showing Faith and her sister when they were younger encountering what was kind of like a massacre, and it kind of gives her a little bit of motivation here. So she's with her runners, but she's really motivated to taking down the dystopian corporate overlord Kruger and Kasek. Because, you know, they're oppressive and whatnot. And here's the thing with the story. They really tried. They did try and actually develop something with characters and have something going on. And the presentation isn't bad, but there's some weird voice acting and way too many characters, and it's all generic. Any type of little plot twist you do encounter is completely predictable from a mile away. So as much as I do appreciate that they made Faith more of a character, everything else around it I found kind of forgettable. But playing the actual game here is what I care about most, and that's where it feels like more Mirror's Edge, better Mirror's Edge, and I think that's great. The sense of movement this time around is even more amplified, and you really feel like you're looking through Faith's eyes. You do have this open world in front of you with a pretty gorgeous and easy to read map full of stuff to do, and some players are gonna love that and some aren't. There's the story missions, there's side quests, there's runs, there's competitive time trials that all have online leaderboards, and some asynchronous multiplayer stuff like that where you can actually make your own timed runs and let other people compete in them. You're running around, you're climbing and you're jumping and you're wall running and you're doing all that stuff, and it does feel very good. I was actually worried with Dying Light kind of setting the new bar, and it seems to be right up there with it. There's also runner's vision now, which not only gives you red highlighted things to jump on like the original game, but now it kind of actually actively highlights it and sometimes will give you a little weaving path to follow. When it works, it makes you feel like a badass and sometimes really helps you run crazy lines and do awesome stuff and get somewhere. That being said though, it is not always the best path through somewhere. Now while this whole pathfinding thing is very impressive, sometimes there are actually better ways around the actual runner vision path. But the problem here is that because you're following this runner's vision, you're very focused on following that line, and it kind of discourages exploration. Personally, I feel like the runner's vision kind of clashes with the whole open world thing. I think it's a bit too much sometimes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it totally screws you over, but it can be ignored or turned off, thankfully. The open world has plenty of side quests, some of which aren't totally generic, but most are. You know, this is Mirror's Edge, and you're a courier, so there's a lot of running from place to place, getting things and delivering things. Thankfully though, with some missions, indoor environments really break it up. I thought these were very different sequences, and while they always weren't perfect with the control scheme, they were just visually and gameplay wise a little different, and I like them. All of this stuff I've really talked about is when the game is at its best. The open world exploration is pretty fun, at least for me personally, because I like running around, collecting orbs, doing side things, checking off lists, leveling up my character, and upgrading. Because there is an upgrade tree here because, you know, this is the new Mirror's Edge game and it has to have all the modern conventions of games. I do like leveling up and collecting things to level up, but most of the tree systems are very, very simple. To some, all of this stuff that I said flies in the face of what the original Mirror's Edge was. Personally, I think of it more as an expansion, but on the flip side, it doesn't really make the game feel like its own. It does feel like a Mirror's Edge that's just catering to all the stuff you have to do in video games these days. But I found the exploration fun, just running around and jumping on stuff. The game world is a nice size, and it's multi-tiered, and when I wasn't doing missions, I really enjoyed just running around and doing stuff. I think it's the best part of the game, and once again, I think it's kind of a shame that the runner's vision can sometimes discourage this. There's even some cool moments where you're basically navigating through a giant computer server, dodging laser security lines. It's very cool. In the gameplay this time around, there's a grappling hook that works fair enough and a disruptor that lets you deactivate certain things, but the combat here got a lot of changes and it's worth talking about. I think this is where the game can kind of fall apart for some people. There's no more guns or shooting, which is very cool, and there's this emphasis on momentum hits and, you know, keeping moving. That's where it works best, in short bursts. When you're in a story mission, you're running through a hallway, hallway, you wall run and kick a guy in the face and keep going. But then when tougher enemies are introduced, you need to implement some strategy in how you use your attacks, but as long as things are fast, it's fairly fine. Once you get stuck in a group, though, and you're faced with actually taking out a couple of enemies, that's where the cracks start to show. Because the AI is completely dumb, so dumb, and the combat is a little bit too simplistic and annoying, and you don't always really get that satisfying crunch you need. Especially in areas that are basically set up like arenas. You're in a locked room and guys come in and you gotta punch them all to progress. That's where it just feels really awful and embarrassing because you can throw the enemies around and it looks hilarious because they kind of just fall over ledges almost willingly. And it's easy to just get your flow interrupted and then you're like, oh shit, oh god damn it. And then it just kind of all looks on screen pretty embarrassing and lame. There is a learning curve to it though, because there is a bit more going on than you would expect, and I do appreciate that. But sometimes I think that just makes for some of the fights feeling craptastic. There is a focus shield now though, so when you're moving and you're gaining momentum, you can kind of push yourself even harder and be temporarily shielded from people that are shooting at you. So it's kind of like you're running really fast and actively moving and dodging the projectiles. If I'm not explaining it right, that doesn't make sense. It feels really good in the game though. And the game looks pretty damn gorgeous, especially in motion. Any time of day, especially at night because it feels like Blade Runner. There's just a lot going on and it looks pretty great. Stop and look around, however, and some things don't look good up close, like some textures and NPCs. Also on consoles, the frame rate isn't perfect, but on PC it's good. But regardless of PCs or consoles, I've had bad loading times across the board, which is really frustrating when you're constantly running off cliffs and falling off edges down to your death. But like I said, Mirror's Edge Catalyst is at its best when you're just running around and exploring. When the game's actually really working best, it's pretty damn good, but some of the other stuff in there isn't so hot. So basically what I've tried to give you is a pros and cons list. If it sounds like I'm being too hard on the game, I apologize for that because there is a lot to like here, and I do have some fun, and when the game is being awesome, it's being really awesome. It's all just a very mixed experience, and I go back and forth with it. But I can't emphasize enough, some of you guys out there might really love exploring the rooftops. The parkour gameplay does work really well, and it is worth experiencing. But maybe because of this, I can't recommend the game at full price, maybe wait for a sale, because the story isn't really worth experiencing at all, and by all means, it is not a perfect game. I don't think it's an awful game, it's just okay. But of course, I've given you the things that you can do in the game and how I feel about them, so I do want to know in the comments what you guys think about Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Whether you've been playing it or if you've just been watching gameplay, how do you really feel about it? Are you willing to give it a try? And if you have been playing it, do you agree with me or no? I think some diehard fans are going to find a lot more to love in this than me, but I'm just ultimately kind of mixed. We can also talk about Mirror's Edge or any other game if you follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Jake Baldino. You guys know the deal though, if you love Before You Buy videos, we appreciate you coming by, and we like it even more when you click the like button. And if this is your first time here, subscribing is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.